Dearest listeners, before we embark upon today's most scandalous tale of redemption and unexpected love, might I entreat you to show your appreciation with a like and subscription. Your comments below sustain this author's dedication to bringing you the most intriguing chronicles of Regency society. And if the hype feature graces your screen, do employ it to share this particular story far and wide, for it contains truths that society would rather keep hidden. One must confess that in all the drawing rooms of Mayfair, there exists no more potent intoxicant than scandal transformed into triumph through the alchemy of true love. Today, your humble chronicler brings you the most remarkable tale of a young woman's escape from the darkest depths of London's underbelly into the rarefied heights of ducal protection. Though that protection, as you shall discover, came with its own peculiar price. But let us not rush. For the best stories, like the finest aged port, must be savored properly. The morning of the 15th of April, in the year of our Lord 1815, dawned gray and forbidding over the squalid streets of Whitechapel, where misery dwelt in every shadow, and hope seemed as foreign as the spices from the Orient sold in more respectable quarters of the metropolis. In a narrow house that leaned precariously against its neighbors as though seeking support for its own moral failings, Miss Kate Hartwell sat perfectly still before a cracked-looking glass, watching her mother's reflection move about the cramped chamber with the nervous energy of one who has made a bargain with the devil himself. Kate's beauty, it must be acknowledged, was of the sort that transcended the squalor of her surroundings. Possessed of hair, the color of autumn chestnuts that caught what little light penetrated the grimy windows. Eyes of such a startling shade of green that they put one in mind of the emerald necklaces displayed in the shops of Bond Street, and features so delicately formed that one might suppose nature had intended her for a drawing room rather than the deplorable circumstances in which she found herself. At 19 years of age, she displayed an unusual amalgamation of innocence and intelligence that made her mother's intentions all the more heinous. Mrs. Hartwell, whose own beauty had long since been eroded by gin and disappointment, moved about the room, gathering Kate's few possessions with hands that trembled not from emotion, but from the absence of her usual morning draft. The woman had once been respectable, the wife of a clerk in a counting house, but Mr. Hartwell's death from consumption 3 years prior had begun their inexorable descent into poverty. Each pawned treasure, each smaller lodging, each compromise of dignity had led them to this moment, this morning, this unspeakable betrayal. The establishment to which Mrs. Hartwell had sold her daughter's virtue was known in certain circles as Mrs. Wickham's Academy for Young Ladies, though no education occurred there, save that which would make any respectable woman faint dead away. The proprietress, a woman of considerable girth and even more considerable cruelty, had paid £30 for Kate, a fortune to the desperate Mrs. Hartwell, a pittance for the destruction of an innocent life. The transaction had been conducted the previous evening whilst Kate slept, exhausted from taking in mending to earn their bread. Kate had discovered the truth only an hour ago, when her mother, fortified by cheap gin purchased with part of her blood money, had confessed all with the casual cruelty of one who has convinced themselves that survival justifies any sin. The girl had not wept, had not raged, had not pleaded. She had simply sat before the looking-glass, studying her reflection as though memorizing the face of the person she had been before this knowledge had destroyed something fundamental within her. The carriage that would convey her to her fate was due within the quarter hour. Mrs. Wickham did not tolerate delays, and the 2 large men she employed to collect her new acquisitions were known to be persuasive in ways that left no visible marks. Kate understood that flight was impossible. She possessed no money, knew no one who might shelter her, and the law itself would side with her mother's right to dispose of her as she saw fit. The trap was perfectly sprung, escape impossible, hope extinguished. Yet Providence, that mysterious force that delights in overturning human expectations, had already set in motion a series of events that would alter the trajectory of Kate's life in ways that neither mother nor daughter could imagine. For at that very moment, less than 3 miles away in the infinitely more refined environs of Grosvenor Square, Sebastian Montague, the 5th Duke of Ashford, was engaged in a heated discussion with his formidable grandmother that would have consequences reaching far beyond the elegant morning room in which it occurred. His Grace was, by any measure, one of the most eligible men in England. At 32 years of age, he commanded a constellation of qualities that made matchmaking mamas fairly swoon with anticipation. A title that could be traced back to the Conquest, wealth that exceeded even the extravagant standards of the ton, estates that encompassed half of Derbyshire, and personal attractions that would have made him sought after even without his other advantages. Standing well over 6 feet in height, with hair as black as a raven's wing and eyes the color of winter storms, he cut a figure that dominated any room he entered. The Dowager Duchess of Ashford, a woman of 73 years who had outlived 2 husbands and intended to outlive her grandson if he continued to vex her so thoroughly, sat ramrod straight in her chair, her expression one of barely contained fury. She had arrived at the unconscionably early hour of 10 o'clock, rousing her grandson from his study where he had been reviewing correspondence from his estates to deliver an ultimatum that had set the tone for their current confrontation. The subject of their disagreement was marriage, or more precisely, Sebastian's persistent refusal to pursue it. The Dowager had that morning received intelligence that Lady Constance Pemberton, daughter of the Earl of Wessex and the most sought-after debutante of the current season, had been making increasingly bold advances toward Sebastian at every social function. The girl was beautiful, accomplished, possessed of a dowry that would make even a duke take notice, and most importantly, in the Dowager's estimation, came from bloodlines as impeccable as their own. Sebastian's complete indifference to Lady Constance's charms had driven his grandmother to threats. She would, she declared, take matters into her own hands. She would invite the girl and her mother to a house party at Ashford Park. She would orchestrate situations that would compromise them both. She would, in short, see him married before Michaelmas if she had to drag him to the altar herself. The Duke's response to these threats had been characteristically cool. He had no intention, he informed his grandmother, of marrying anyone, least of all a vapid chit whose primary accomplishment was the ability to simper prettily whilst playing the pianoforte badly. His duties to his title would be discharged through his cousin Gerald, currently serving with Wellington's forces in Belgium, who would make an admirable duke when the time came. This declaration had sent the Dowager into what could only be described as apoplexy. Gerald, she shrieked, was a second son of a third son, barely worthy of the name Montague, certainly not worthy of the title. The very suggestion was an insult to 500 years of direct succession. Sebastian would marry, produce an heir, and secure the line, or she would make his life so thoroughly miserable that marriage to Lady Constance would seem a paradise by comparison. It was at this precise moment, as grandmother and grandson glared at each other across the expanse of the Aubusson carpet, that fate intervened in the form of Lord Peter Worthington, Sebastian's closest friend since their days at Eton, who burst into the morning room with an expression of such urgency that even the Dowager's tirade ceased. Lord Worthington, it should be noted, was everything Sebastian was not. Fair where the Duke was dark, gregarious where the Duke was reserved, impulsive where the Duke was calculating. The younger son of a marquis, he possessed sufficient funds to maintain himself in style, but insufficient occupation to keep himself from trouble. His latest enthusiasm, much to the horror of his family, was the reformation of London's most notorious districts, a pursuit that had led him into associations that would have barred him from polite society had his birth and charm not provided immunity. The tale Worthington breathlessly related was one that would have seemed fantastic had he not possessed proof in the form of a crumpled bill of sale he had obtained through means he declined to specify. He had learned, through his network of informants in the East End, of a mother selling her own daughter to a brothel, not just any brothel, but Mrs. Wickham's establishment, known even among the demi-monde as a place of particular cruelty. The girl in question was, by all accounts, gently bred despite her current circumstances, educated, and innocent of any wrongdoing save the misfortune of her birth. The Dowager, predictably, declared this none of their concern. London was full of unfortunate females, and one could not go about rescuing them all without encouraging the very behavior that led to their downfall. Sebastian, however, had gone very still, his storm-gray eyes fixed on his friend with an intensity that would have alarmed anyone who knew him well. The Duke had his own history with Mrs. Wickham's establishment, though it was not what one might suppose. 5 years prior, his younger sister had been lured by a fortune hunter named Captain Morrison into what she believed would be an elopement. Instead, the blackguard had attempted to sell her to Mrs. Wickham, intending to claim she had run off with another man whilst pocketing the considerable sum the proprietress would pay for a duke's sister. Sebastian had arrived in time to prevent the transaction, though not in time to prevent the scandal that would have erupted had the truth become known. Morrison had met with an unfortunate accident shortly thereafter, falling from his horse in Hyde Park and breaking his neck, though some whispered the accident had been rather more assisted than the official report suggested. The memory of that night, his sister's terror, Mrs. Wickham's grotesque leer, the casual evil of the entire enterprise, had never left Sebastian. He had used his influence to have the establishment watched, but Mrs. Wickham was clever, her protectors powerful, and the law disinclined to intervene in what was considered a necessary evil of metropolitan life. But this situation presented an opportunity for something more than mere observation. Rising with the controlled grace that characterized all his movements, Sebastian informed his grandmother that he had urgent business to attend to in the city. Her protests that their discussion was far from concluded fell on deaf ears. Within minutes, he and Worthington were in Sebastian's town coach, the matched greys eating up the distance between Mayfair and Whitechapel at a speed that would have scandalized the most experienced whips of London. Meanwhile, in that narrow house where hope had died, Kate Hartwell heard the approaching carriage wheels with the calm of one who has accepted their fate. Her mother had retreated to her own chamber, unable or unwilling to witness the culmination of her betrayal. Kate stood slowly, smoothing the worn fabric of her best dress, a pale blue muslin that had seen better days but which she had maintained with the meticulous care of one who has little else to take pride in. She descended the narrow stairs with measured steps, her small valise in hand, her spine straight, despite the weight of despair that pressed upon her. The two men who emerged from the carriage were exactly as she had imagined, large, brutal-faced creatures who looked at her with the casual assessment of those evaluating livestock. Neither spoke as they gestured for her to enter the carriage, their silence more menacing than any threat. It was precisely at this moment that the Duke of Ashford's coach rounded the corner at unprecedented velocity. The sight that greeted Sebastian and Worthington, a young woman of obvious quality being forced into a carriage by two ruffians, required no explanation. The Duke's coachman, a former pugilist named Thompson, who had been in Sebastian's employ for 10 years, needed only a nod from his master to understand what was required. The confrontation that followed was brief but decisive. Thompson's fists, combined with Lord Worthington's surprising proficiency with his walking stick and Sebastian's cold authority, sent Mrs. Wickham's collectors fleeing back to their carriage. But it was the Duke himself who approached Kate, who stood frozen on the doorstep, as though unable to comprehend this sudden reversal of fortune. Sebastian's first clear sight of Kate Hartwell was one that would remain etched in his memory with the clarity of a cameo. She stood with the morning light catching the auburn highlights in her hair, her remarkable green eyes wide with shock and confusion, her delicate features composed despite the ordeal she had so narrowly escaped. But it was something else, something indefinable in her bearing, a dignity that transcended her shabby surroundings, a strength that adversity had refined rather than destroyed, that made him catch his breath. While Sebastian was absent during the following weeks, ostensibly supervising matters at his Derbyshire estate, his thoughts returned with alarming frequency to London. He found himself wondering how Kate was faring under his grandmother's tutelage, not with the amusement of one who has set a trap, but with genuine concern. The image of her defiant dignity amid the squalor of Whitechapel had etched itself into his mind, an image that eclipsed those of all the impeccable debutantes he had ever encountered. The introductions that followed were necessarily brief and somewhat irregular. Sebastian identified himself simply as someone who had business with Mrs. Wickham that did not include allowing her to acquire new victims. Kate, finding her voice at last, expressed her gratitude with a composure that belied her inner turmoil. The situation, however, remained precarious. Mrs. Wickham would not accept this interference without retaliation, and Kate's mother retained the legal right to dispose of her daughter as she wished. It was Lord Worthington who proposed the immediate solution. Kate must be removed from this place at once, taken somewhere safe, while they determined a more permanent resolution. Sebastian, his mind working with the strategic precision that had made him formidable in the House of Lords, saw an opportunity that would solve multiple problems simultaneously. He made Kate an offer that was as unexpected as it was pragmatic. She would accompany him to his grandmother's house, where she would be introduced as his fiancée. This fiction would serve multiple purposes. It would place Kate under his protection in a way that even Mrs. Wickham would not dare challenge. It would silence his grandmother's matrimonial demands, at least temporarily, and it would provide time to establish Kate in a respectable position, perhaps as a companion to a lady of good family who would not inquire too closely into her origins. The proposition was, by any measure, outrageous. No duke would claim a woman of unknown background as his intended bride. The potential for scandal was enormous, the benefits to Sebastian negligible, the risk to his reputation considerable. Yet he made the offer with the same cool certainty with which he conducted all his affairs, as though the idea of a Duke of Ashford presenting a girl from Whitechapel as his future Duchess was the most natural thing in the world. Kate's acceptance of this proposal revealed much about her character. A lesser woman might have swooned, or wept, or fallen into hysterics at the magnitude of what was being offered and what would be required of her. Kate simply met Sebastian's storm-gray eyes with her remarkable green ones and agreed with a quiet dignity that suggested she understood perfectly both the honor and the burden he was conferring upon her. The journey from Whitechapel to Grosvenor Square was conducted in relative silence, each of the carriage's occupants lost in contemplation of the enormity of what they had just set in motion. Lord Worthington, uncharacteristically subdued, recognized that his friend had just committed himself to a course of action that could have far-reaching consequences. Sebastian maintained his usual inscrutability, though his gaze returned repeatedly to Kate's profile as she gazed out the window at the gradually improving neighborhoods they passed through. Kate herself seemed to be memorizing every street, every building, as though afraid she might wake to find it all a dream. The transformation in scenery from the squalid streets of Whitechapel to the magnificent squares of Mayfair was like moving between different worlds entirely. The houses grew larger and more ornate, the streets wider and cleaner, the very air seemed to become more refined. By the time they reached Grosvenor Square, with its perfectly manicured gardens and imposing residences, Kate felt as though she had traveled not miles, but centuries. The Dowager Duchess of Ashford had not moved from the morning room, her fury having transformed into a cold determination to wait for her grandson's return and resume their battle. The announcement that Sebastian had arrived with Lord Worthington and a young lady sent her into a state of anticipation that bordered on the predatory. Whatever foolish creature her grandson had brought to distract from their discussion would be dispatched with the ruthless efficiency for which the Dowager was justly feared. The entrance of the trio into the morning room created a tableau that would have been worthy of the Royal Academy. The Dowager, enthroned in her chair like an ancient empress, her lorgnette raised in preparation for devastating scrutiny. Lord Worthington, hovering near the door as though prepared for rapid retreat. Sebastian, standing with characteristic sang-froid, one hand placed protectively at Kate's elbow. And Kate herself, looking like a woodland sprite who had wandered into a palace, her simple dress and modest demeanor a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding her. Sebastian's announcement that this was Miss Kate Hartwell, his fiancée, produced a silence so profound that the ticking of the ormolu clock on the mantelpiece sounded like thunder. The Dowager's lorgnette actually dropped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, an occurrence so unprecedented that Lord Worthington would later swear he heard the heavens themselves gasp in shock. The recovery of the Dowager's composure was swift and terrible to behold. She rose from her chair with the ominous dignity of an approaching storm, her gaze fixed upon Kate with an intensity that had reduced grown men to stammering apologies. Her assessment was thorough and merciless. The shabby dress, the lack of jewelry, the absence of any fashionable accomplishment in hair or bearing. When she finally spoke, Her voice could have frozen the Thames in July. The interrogation that followed would have destroyed a woman of lesser fortitude. The dowager demanded to know everything: Kate's parentage, her education, her connections, her expectations. Each answer Kate provided with quiet honesty only seemed to deepen the older woman's horror. The daughter of a deceased clerk, no connections of consequence, educated at home, currently residing in reduced circumstances in Whitechapel. Each revelation was worse than the last. Yet Kate bore this inquisition with a composure that began to intrigue the dowager despite herself. The girl did not attempt to dissemble or embellish her circumstances. She did not cringe or weep or plead. She simply stood there, her startling green eyes steady, answering each question with a dignity that her shabby dress could not diminish. When the dowager, in a moment of particular cruelty, inquired whether Kate understood the magnitude of the gulf between herself and the position of Duchess of Ashford, Kate's response was surprisingly astute. She understood perfectly, Kate replied, the impossibility of what was being proposed. She had no illusions about her suitability for such an elevated position. She was, however, grateful for His Grace's protection and would endeavor to cause as little embarrassment as possible during whatever duration this arrangement required. She would understand completely if the dowager wished her removed immediately and would make no claims upon the Duke's generosity beyond what had already been extended. This response, so unexpected in its perception and humility, caused the dowager to reassess the girl before her. Intelligence, she grudgingly admitted to herself, the chit possessed. Courage as well, to stand here and face this interrogation without flinching. And there was something else. Something in the way she held herself, the clarity of her speech despite her origins, that suggested breeding might not be entirely absent from her lineage. Sebastian, who had remained silent during this exchange, now intervened with the smooth authority that made him so formidable in Parliament. The announcement would be delayed, naturally, until Kate had been properly prepared for her role. She would remain here, under the dowager's tutelage, learning everything necessary to conduct herself as his future duchess. If, after 3 months, the dowager found her unsuitable, the engagement would be quietly dissolved, and Kate would be established in a respectable position with a generous dowry to ensure her future security. The challenge in Sebastian's eyes as he regarded his grandmother was unmistakable. Here was her opportunity to prove that birth was not everything, that with proper training and guidance, a woman of intelligence and character could rise to any position. Or she could admit defeat, acknowledge that her insistence on his marriage was mere empty posturing, and release him from any further matrimonial obligations. The dowager, who had not maintained her position in society for over 50 years by backing down from challenges, recognized the trap her grandson had set. If she refused to take on this impossible task, she would lose any moral authority to demand he marry. If she accepted and failed, the same result would occur. Her only option was to succeed, to transform this Whitechapel waif into a woman worthy of the Ashford title, a task that would require every ounce of her considerable skill and determination. Her acceptance of this challenge was delivered with the same icy composure with which she had conducted the interrogation. 3 months, she agreed, would be sufficient to determine whether Miss Hartwell possessed the capacity to become a duchess. However, she would have complete authority over the girl's training, and Sebastian would absent himself entirely from the process. He could return in 3 months to see what had been accomplished. Until then, Kate would be entirely under her authority. The look that passed between Kate and Sebastian at this pronouncement was brief, but loaded with meaning. He was abandoning her to a woman who clearly despised everything about her, placing her in a situation where she would be constantly reminded of her inadequacies, subjecting her to a trial that would break most women of even elevated birth. Yet his eyes seemed to convey a confidence in her ability to survive, even triumph, that Kate found both puzzling and oddly strengthening. The arrangements that followed were swift and efficient. Kate was installed in a suite of rooms that exceeded in luxury anything she had ever imagined. A lady's maid named Prudence, chosen by the dowager for her discretion and skill, was assigned to attend her. A modiste would arrive the following morning to begin creating a wardrobe suitable for a future duchess. Tutors would be engaged for deportment, dancing, music, French, and the 1,000 other accomplishments expected of a lady of quality. That first night, as Kate lay in a bed that could have accommodated her entire family in their Whitechapel lodgings, she reflected on the remarkable reversal of fortune that had occurred in the space of a single day. That morning, she had faced degradation and ruin. Tonight, she slept under the protection of one of the most powerful men in England. The price of that protection, to pretend to be something she could never truly be, seemed small compared to the fate she had escaped. Yet as she drifted towards sleep, her thoughts were not of duchesses or deportment lessons, but of storm-gray eyes that had looked at her with something she could not quite define. Sebastian Montague had saved her, yes, but there had been something in his gaze, a recognition perhaps, that suggested he had seen something in her that she did not yet see in herself. The following weeks were a torture that would have been worthy of the Spanish Inquisition. The Dowager, true to her word, had taken complete control of Kate's transformation, and her methods were nothing short of ruthless. From dawn until well past dusk, Kate was subjected to a regimen that would have exhausted a cavalry officer. The deportment lessons were particularly grueling. Madame Belmont, a French émigré who claimed to have trained half the French aristocracy before the Revolution, had opinions about everything from the angle at which Kate held her head to the precise degree of curl in her fingers when holding a teacup. Hours were spent walking with books balanced on her head, learning to curtsy with variations so subtle that Kate initially could not distinguish between them, practicing the art of sitting, standing, and moving with the fluid grace expected of a duchess. During a rare supervised walk in the garden, Kate froze upon spotting a familiar face on the street, one of the brutal men from Mrs. Wickham's coach, watching the house before disappearing into the crowd. The sight was a chilling reminder that while she dwelt in a gilded cage, the wolves still prowled outside. The dancing master, Signor Benedetti, was equally demanding. Kate had never danced anything more complex than a country reel at the local assemblies her father had occasionally attended, when they still maintained some pretense of respectability. The intricate steps of the quadrille, the waltz, still considered somewhat scandalous but increasingly accepted, the cotillion, all had to be mastered with a perfection that would not embarrass the Ashford name. Languages proved to be an unexpected strength. Kate's father, before his decline, had been an educated man who had insisted on teaching his daughter Latin and French. While her pronunciation needed refinement, her comprehension was excellent, and she quickly added Italian to her repertoire under the tutelage of Signor Benedetti, who was delighted to find a pupil who could appreciate Dante in the original. The lessons in household management were conducted by the Dowager herself, who seemed to take perverse pleasure in describing the complexity of running multiple estates, managing dozens of servants, hosting elaborate entertainments, and navigating the treacherous waters of society politics. Every great house in England was discussed, their inhabitants dissected, their connections analyzed, their scandals discreetly examined for educational purposes. During one such lesson on household economy, the Dowager lamented the cost of repairing the lace on a ball gown. Kate, remembering countless hours of mending, timidly offered a solution, describing a nearly invisible stitch she had learned. The Dowager, initially dismissive, allowed her to attempt it and was genuinely impressed with the perfection of the repair. A rare moment when Kate's former life proved not a disadvantage, but an unexpected asset. Music proved more challenging. Kate had never had the opportunity to learn an instrument, and while her voice was pleasant enough, the pianoforte seemed determined to resist her every effort. The music master, Mr. Hartley, a man of infinite patience and mild manner, spent hours guiding her fingers through scales and simple pieces, though they both knew she would never achieve the proficiency expected of a lady of quality. It was the transformation of her appearance that proved most dramatic. The modiste, Madame Rochelle, had taken one look at Kate and declared that she had been sent a diamond in the rough. Kate's figure, despite the privations of recent years, was naturally elegant. Her coloring, that remarkable combination of chestnut hair and green eyes, required only the proper setting to be stunning. The clothes that began arriving were works of art. Morning dresses in delicate muslins, afternoon gowns in rich silks, evening wear that transformed Kate into someone she did not recognize in the mirror. The hairdresser performed similar miracles, teaching Prudence elaborate styles that showcased Kate's natural beauty while maintaining the elegance expected of her supposed position. Jewelry, selected by the Dowager from the Ashford collection, appeared as if by magic. Nothing too elaborate initially, but pieces that spoke of wealth and taste. Pearl earrings, a simple gold necklace, a bracelet of emeralds that matched her eyes. Throughout this transformation, Kate saw nothing of Sebastian. True to the agreement, he had absented himself entirely, though Lord Worthington occasionally appeared to take tea with the Dowager and cast encouraging glances in Kate's direction. The Duke's absence was both a relief and a strange source of disappointment. Relief because she could focus entirely on her lessons without the distraction of those storm-gray eyes. Disappointment for reasons she did not care to examine too closely. The Dowager, meanwhile, was experiencing a most unwelcome sensation. She was beginning to respect, even like, the girl she had intended to break. Kate's determination was remarkable, her intelligence undeniable, her capacity to learn impressive. More than that, she possessed an innate kindness that expressed itself in small ways. Her genuine concern for Prudence when the maid's mother fell ill, her patience with Mr. Hartley's stuttering, her grateful appreciation for every lesson, no matter how grueling. Even more disturbing to the Dowager was the realization that Kate was beginning to carry herself with genuine nobility. Not the artificial posturing of those who aspired to rise above their station, but the natural dignity of someone who understood that true nobility came from character rather than birth. It was most vexing, particularly as the Dowager had spent 73 years believing exactly the opposite. 6 weeks into the transformation, an unexpected test arose. Lady Worthington, Lord Peter's mother and one of the Dowager's oldest friends, called unexpectedly. She had heard rumors, she declared, of Sebastian's engagement and demanded to meet the bride-to-be immediately. The Dowager, caught between revealing the incomplete state of Kate's training and risking exposure of the entire fiction, chose to brave it out. Kate was summoned to the drawing room with barely 5 minutes to prepare. She entered to find 2 formidable matrons examining her with the intensity of naturalists discovering a new species. Lady Worthington was known for her ability to detect the slightest deficiency in breeding or deportment, her tongue sharp enough to flay the pretensions from any upstart who dared enter her circle. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in social warfare. Lady Worthington deployed every weapon in her considerable arsenal, barbed comments disguised as compliments, questions designed to trap the unwary into revealing their ignorance, references to people and events that only someone of the highest circles would understand. Kate, drawing on every lesson of the past 6 weeks, navigated these hazards with a grace that surprised even the Dowager. When Lady Worthington inquired about Kate's family, she responded with quiet dignity about her father's service as a clerk, neither embellishing nor apologizing for her origins. When asked about her accomplishments, she admitted her limitations while emphasizing her eagerness to learn. When the conversation turned to current events, she demonstrated a knowledge gleaned from the newspapers the Dowager had insisted she read daily, offering opinions that were informed without being presumptuous. The moment of greatest danger came when Lady Worthington, with calculated cruelty, mentioned that she had heard Kate resided in Whitechapel before her engagement. The silence that followed was pregnant with potential disaster. Kate's response, when it came, was masterful in its simplicity. She confirmed that circumstances had indeed forced her to temporary lodgings in an unfashionable area, but that His Grace's generosity had rescued her from a situation that had become untenable. She offered no details, made no excuses, and met Lady Worthington's sharp gaze with calm confidence. Lady Worthington's departure was followed by an unprecedented event. The Dowager actually smiled at Kate. It was a small smile, quickly suppressed, but unmistakable. The girl had passed her first real test, had faced one of society's most feared dragons, and emerged unscathed. Perhaps, the Dowager thought with something approaching wonder, this impossible task might not be impossible after all. The remaining 6 weeks of training intensified rather than eased. Now that Kate had proven she could survive a basic social encounter, the Dowager was determined to polish her to a degree that would withstand the scrutiny of the entire ton. Guest lists for every important house in London were memorized, genealogies studied. the subtle art of precedence mastered. Kate learned to recognize the difference between Sèvres and Meissen porcelain, to distinguish between Rubens and Rembrandt, to appreciate the superiority of Chateau Margaux over lesser vintages. The physical transformation was equally dramatic. Regular meals and rest had restored a bloom to Kate's complexion that poverty had threatened to permanently extinguish. Exercise in the form of daily walks in the private garden behind Ashford House had given her movements a confident grace. The constant attention to posture and bearing had transformed her from a pretty girl into a striking woman who commanded attention simply by entering a room. Yet the most profound change was internal. Kate was discovering aspects of herself she had never suspected existed. She had a natural gift for languages, a genuine appreciation for art and music, and a strategic mind that allowed her to navigate social complexities with increasing skill. More surprisingly, she was finding that she enjoyed many aspects of this new life, not just the luxury, though she would have been dishonest to deny its appeal, but the intellectual stimulation, the sense of purpose, the feeling that she was becoming someone of consequence rather than merely existing. The date of Sebastian's return approached with alarming rapidity. The dowager, who had initially viewed this deadline with grim determination, now found herself genuinely anxious about the outcome. She had, against all expectation and her own better judgment, become fond of Kate. The girl had worked harder than any debutante the dowager had ever trained, had accepted criticism without complaint, had shown a strength of character that transcended the unfortunate circumstances of her birth. On the morning of the appointed day, Kate stood before her mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Prudence had dressed her in a morning gown of soft rose silk that complemented her coloring perfectly. Her hair was arranged in an elegant style that managed to be both fashionable and flattering. The simple pearl earrings and necklace she wore were perfectly appropriate for the hour and occasion. She looked, in short, exactly like what she was pretending to be, a young woman of quality preparing to meet her fiancé. The dowager, observing from the doorway, felt an unexpected pride in what had been accomplished. The transformation was complete, or as complete as 3 months could make it. Kate would never have the instinctive arrogance of those born to the purple, but perhaps that was not entirely a disadvantage. She possessed something rarer, a genuine grace that came from understanding both privilege and privation. Sebastian arrived precisely at 11 o'clock, accompanied as before by Lord Worthington. The dowager had arranged for them to meet in the blue drawing room, its formal elegance providing the perfect setting for this crucial encounter. She had coached Kate extensively on how to behave, warm enough to be credible as his fiancé, reserved enough to maintain propriety, confident enough to show the transformation, modest enough to avoid seeming presumptuous. All that coaching fled Kate's mind the moment Sebastian entered the room. The 3 months' absence had not diminished the impact of his presence. If anything, it had intensified it. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, his storm-gray eyes taking in every detail of her transformation with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Lord Worthington's cheerful exclamation of amazement barely registered as Sebastian crossed the room toward her with that controlled grace she remembered so well. The greeting between them was necessarily formal given the presence of others, but Sebastian's bow over her hand lingered a fraction longer than strict propriety demanded, and his murmured words of approval sent an unexpected warmth through her. The dowager, watching with hawk-like attention, noted the subtle tension between them with interest. She had expected awkwardness, perhaps embarrassment on Kate's part, cool assessment on Sebastian's. She had not expected this crackling awareness that seemed to charge the very air between them. The conversation that followed was a careful dance of evaluation and revelation. Sebastian questioned Kate about her studies, her progress, her comfort in his grandmother's house. Kate responded with the poise she had worked so hard to achieve, though she was acutely aware of his every movement, every shift in expression. The dowager interjected occasionally, providing evidence of Kate's accomplishments, though she noted with increasing fascination that her grandson seemed far more interested in Kate herself than in the litany of her achievements. When Kate was asked to demonstrate her musical progress, she moved to the pianoforte with visible reluctance. This remained her weakest accomplishment, and she had no wish to embarrass herself before Sebastian. Yet as she began to play the simple Mozart sonata she had labored so hard to master, she found his presence oddly calming rather than nerve-wracking. The piece was far from perfectly executed, but it was creditable, and when she finished, Sebastian's approval seemed genuine rather than polite. The true test came when Sebastian suggested a walk in Hyde Park. It would be Kate's first semi-public appearance as his supposed fiancé, though the fashionable hour was still some time away, limiting the number of potential observers. The dowager, after a long moment's consideration, agreed, though she insisted on accompanying them as chaperone, much to Lord Worthington's barely suppressed amusement. The carriage ride to Hyde Park was conducted in relative quiet, each occupant absorbed in their own thoughts. Kate was acutely conscious of Sebastian sitting opposite her, his presence making the spacious carriage seem suddenly intimate. The dowager maintained her usual regal bearing while secretly observing the interplay between her grandson and his unusual fiancé. Lord Worthington, with uncharacteristic tact, kept his observations to himself, though his eyes danced with suppressed mirth. Hyde Park in the early afternoon was relatively uncrowded, though not entirely deserted. A few dedicated equestrians exercised their mounts along Rotten Row, nursemaids pushed perambulators along the paths, and the occasional couple strolled beneath the trees. Kate, walking between Sebastian and his grandmother with Lord Worthington bringing up the rear, felt as though she were on stage, every eye upon her despite the sparse audience. The first encounter came in the form of Lady Ashbury and her daughter, Miss Penelope Ashbury, one of the season's debutantes. Lady Ashbury's surprise at seeing the notoriously elusive Duke of Ashford escorting an unknown young lady was poorly concealed. The introductions that followed were Kate's first real test in a public setting, and she acquitted herself admirably, responding to Lady Ashbury's barely veiled curiosity with polite reserve while avoiding any statements that might later prove problematic. Miss Ashbury, a pretty blonde with ambitious eyes, assessed Kate with the calculating gaze of a rival. Her attempts to monopolize Sebastian's attention were deftly countered by the dowager, who had no intention of allowing some chit to upset the careful fiction they were maintaining. When the Ashburys finally moved on, trailing speculation in their wake, Sebastian quietly complimented Kate on her handling of the encounter. The second meeting was more challenging. Lord and Lady Pemberton, accompanied by their daughter Lady Constance, the very woman the dowager had originally intended for Sebastian, appeared on the path ahead. There was no avoiding the encounter, though Kate noticed Sebastian's jaw tighten slightly at the sight of them. Lady Constance was everything Kate was not: tall, blonde, classically beautiful, and possessed of the supreme confidence that came from knowing one's place in the world had been secure from birth. The introduction of Kate as Sebastian's fiancée produced a moment of shocked silence from the Pembertons. Lady Constance's perfect features contracted in an expression of disbelief that she quickly masked, though not before Kate caught a glimpse of something that looked remarkably like fury. Lord Pemberton recovered first, offering congratulations that rang hollow, while his wife subjected Kate to an examination that would have been insulting had it not been so transparently motivated by shock. Lady Constance's response was a masterpiece of barely concealed hostility wrapped in superficial sweetness. She expressed her delight at Sebastian's happiness, her pleasure at meeting his chosen bride, her hope that they would all become the dearest of friends. Each word dripped with venom so subtle that only another woman would detect it. Kate, drawing on reserves of composure she had not known she possessed, responded with equal sweetness and even less sincerity, creating a performance that made the dowager mentally applaud. The remainder of the walk passed without significant incident, though Kate was aware of the whispers that followed in their wake. News of the Duke of Ashford's engagement to an unknown woman would spread through the ton like wildfire. By evening, speculation would be rampant. Within days, every aspect of Kate's invented history would be scrutinized, analyzed, and dissected by society's most devoted gossips. The return to Grosvenor Square was accomplished in thoughtful silence. Once safely ensconced in the blue drawing room, the dowager delivered her verdict. Kate had passed the initial test, but the real challenges lay ahead. She would need to be presented at a formal event, something where the entire ton could observe and judge. A ball would be too much too soon, but perhaps a musical evening, something intimate enough to control, but public enough to establish Kate's presence in society. Sebastian's agreement to this plan came with conditions. He would increase his visible attention to Kate, establishing their supposed attachment more firmly. They would be seen driving in the park during the fashionable hour, attending the opera, perhaps taking tea at Gunter's. The more they were observed together, the more credible their eventual engagement announcement would become. What none of them discussed, though it hung in the air like an unspoken question, was what would happen when the 3-month trial period ended. The original agreement had been that Kate would be established in a respectable position if she proved unsuitable. But she had proven eminently suitable, had exceeded every expectation. The fiction they had created was becoming increasingly elaborate, increasingly difficult to dissolve without consequence. That evening, as Kate prepared for dinner, a formal affair now that Sebastian had returned, she found herself contemplating the strange turn her life had taken. 3 months ago, she had been facing degradation and ruin. Now she was dining with a duke, wearing a gown worth more than her father had earned in a year, discussing poetry and politics as though she had been born to such conversations. The transformation was so complete that sometimes she forgot it was all pretense. Yet as she descended the stairs to join the others for dinner, she caught sight of Sebastian waiting in the hall below, his evening dress impeccable, his dark beauty compelling even in repose. The look he gave her as she approached, intense, appreciative, something more she dared not name, reminded her forcefully that whatever else this arrangement might be, it was not simple. The attraction she felt toward him, inappropriate and impossible as it was, had only grown stronger during their separation. The dinner that followed was a revelation in multiple ways. The dowager, perhaps testing the waters for future social engagements, had invited several guests: Lord and Lady Worthington, Sir Frederick and Lady Hartley, distant relations of the dowager, and Mr. James Crawford, a rising member of Parliament known for his reform sympathies. It was a small enough gathering to be manageable, but diverse enough to provide a genuine social challenge. Kate found herself seated between Mr. Crawford and Sir Frederick, a placement that required her to navigate between political discourse and antiquarian enthusiasm with equal facility. Mr. Crawford, discovering her intelligence and genuine interest in social reform, engaged her in a spirited discussion about the poor laws that drew Sebastian's attention from across the table. Sir Frederick, meanwhile, regaled her with tales of archaeological expeditions that required patient attention despite their tendency toward the soporific. It was during the removal of the second course that disaster nearly struck. Lady Hartley, with the casual cruelty of the securely positioned, mentioned having heard the most unusual rumors about Miss Hartwell's origins. Some claimed she was the secret daughter of foreign nobility, others that she was an orphan Sebastian had discovered in mysterious circumstances. What, Lady Hartley wondered with barbed sweetness, was the truth? The table fell silent, all eyes turning to Kate. This was the moment she had been trained for, the crucial test of whether she could maintain the fiction under direct assault. Her response, when it came, was perfect in its simplicity. She acknowledged that her circumstances before meeting His Grace had been unusual and somewhat difficult, that she understood why speculation might arise, but that she preferred to focus on the future rather than dwell on the past. She then deftly turned the conversation to Lady Hartley's own charitable work, effectively deflecting attention, while subtly implying that a true lady would not press for details that were obviously painful. Sebastian's intervention was smooth and decisive. He spoke of Kate's admirable qualities, her intelligence, her grace under pressure, her compassion for those less fortunate. He made it clear, without being heavy-handed, that anyone who questioned his choice would be questioning his judgment, a dangerous proposition for anyone who valued their social standing. The message was received. Lady Hartley retreated into safer conversational waters. The evening's success was marred only by a private moment Kate witnessed between Sebastian and his grandmother. Passing the library door, inadvertently left ajar, she heard the dowager's voice, uncharacteristically emotional. "You are playing with fire, Sebastian. The girl is everything admirable, but this cannot end well. When the truth emerges, as it inevitably must, she will be ruined utterly." Sebastian's response was too low for Kate to hear, but the dowager's reply was clear. "You think to protect her with your name and fortune, but society has a long memory and no mercy. And what of your own heart? I am not blind, grandson. I see how you look at her. Kate fled before she could hear more, but the words haunted her through the remaining days. The dowager was right, of course. This masquerade could not continue indefinitely. Every day that passed made the inevitable revelation more catastrophic. She was living in a fairy tale, but fairy tales ended, and not always happily. The musical evening the dowager had planned was set for the following week. It would be hosted by Lady Worthington, providing a degree of separation that would allow them to gauge society's reaction without fully committing the Ashford name. The guest list was carefully curated, influential enough to matter, diverse enough to spread word throughout different social circles, but not so elevated that a disaster would be irretrievable. Kate's preparation for this event was meticulous. Every possible topic of conversation was reviewed, every potential social pitfall examined, every guest's background memorized. Her gown, a creation of midnight blue silk that made her eyes appear even more striking, was chosen to be elegant without being ostentatious. She would perform one piece on the pianoforte, the Mozart sonata she had mastered. Nothing more ambitious that might reveal her limitations. The night of the musicale arrived with unseasonable warmth that made the Worthington ballroom, despite opened windows, uncomfortably close. Kate, entering on Sebastian's arm, was immediately aware of becoming the focus of intense scrutiny. Conversations paused mid-sentence, fans fluttered with increased agitation, and more than one lorgnette was raised in her direction. The initial introductions were a blur of titles and faces, each presenting unique challenges. The Marchioness of Exeter, known for her cutting wit, probed for weaknesses with surgical precision. The Earl of Blackstone, a notorious rake despite his advancing years, paid her compliments that bordered on the inappropriate until Sebastian's glacial stare convinced him to seek entertainment elsewhere. Young Lord Timmins, barely down from Oxford, developed an immediate and embarrassing infatuation that he expressed in terrible impromptu verses. Yet Kate navigated these challenges with increasing confidence. The dowager's training had been thorough, but more than that, she was discovering that she possessed a natural ability to read people, to understand what they wanted to hear, to deflect the cruel and encourage the kind. By the time the musical performances began, she had made several genuine connections, particularly with Lady Sarah Winters, a young widow whose intelligence and humor promised future friendship. The performances were the typical mixture of genuine talent and dutiful accomplishment. Miss Ashbury murdered a Haydn sonata with enthusiasm, if not skill. Lady Constance Pemberton sang with technical perfection, but no emotion. Mrs. Crawford, despite her advanced years, played the harp with touching delicacy. When Kate's turn came, she approached the pianoforte with outward calm despite her inner turmoil. She had practiced the Mozart piece hundreds of times, could play it in her sleep, yet as she positioned her hands above the keys, a moment of panic seized her. The room was full of people who had been playing since childhood, who could detect every flaw, every hesitation. Then she caught Sebastian's eye. He gave her the slightest nod, a gesture so small others might have missed it, but which conveyed absolute confidence in her abilities. The performance that followed was far from perfect. She missed a note in the second movement. Her tempo was slightly rushed in the third, but she played with something more important than technical precision. She played with feeling. The piece, which she had initially approached as a mechanical exercise, had become something she understood emotionally. When the last note faded, the applause was genuine rather than polite, and she saw approval even in the dowager's stern features. The remainder of the evening passed in a pleasant haze. Sebastian remained close, his presence a constant support without being oppressive. They danced once, a country dance that allowed for little intimacy but which nonetheless left Kate breathless from more than the exertion. His hand holding hers, even through gloves, created sensations she had no business experiencing with a man who was merely protecting her out of kindness and perhaps a desire to irritate his grandmother. It was near the end of the evening that Lord Pemberton approached Sebastian with barely concealed hostility. His daughter, he implied heavily, had been led to expect certain understandings, had refused other offers based on those expectations. This sudden engagement to an unknown woman was not just unexpected, but bordering on insulting. Satisfaction might be required if adequate explanation was not forthcoming. The threat of a duel, however veiled, created immediate tension. Sebastian's response was cool to the point of Arctic. He had made no promises to Lady Constance, implied or otherwise. If she had refused other suitors, that was her choice, not his responsibility. As for satisfaction, Lord Pemberton was welcome to name his seconds if he felt his honor required it, though Sebastian doubted killing the father would endear him to the daughter. Lord Worthington's intervention diffused the situation before it could escalate further. Lord Pemberton, faced with the prospect of facing one of the finest shots in England over a matter where his daughter's presumption, rather than Sebastian's honor, was at fault, withdrew his challenge with ill grace. But the damage was done. The confrontation had been witnessed, and by morning, all of London would know that the Duke of Ashford had been willing to fight for his mysterious fiancée. The carriage ride home was silent, each occupant processing the evening's events. Kate was exhausted, but exhilarated. She had faced society and survived. The Dowager was contemplating the complications Lord Pemberton's challenge had introduced. Lord Worthington was already composing the story he would tell at his club. And Sebastian was watching Kate with an expression that would have alarmed him had he been aware of it. Back at Grosvenor Square, as Kate prepared to retire, she encountered Sebastian alone in the hallway outside her room. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken words. Then Sebastian took her hand, removing her glove with deliberate slowness before pressing his lips to her bare skin in a gesture that was both perfectly proper and somehow shockingly intimate. His words, when they came, were barely above a whisper. "You were magnificent tonight. Every inch the Duchess you were meant to be." Before Kate could respond, before she could process the implications of his words, he was gone, leaving her standing in the hallway with her heart racing and her hand tingling where his lips had touched. The following days brought a deluge of calling cards and invitations. Kate's successful debut had opened doors throughout society. Some were genuinely welcoming, others merely curious, but all wanted to know more about the woman who had captured the elusive Duke of Ashford. The Dowager, with strategic brilliance, accepted only the most advantageous invitations while declining enough to maintain an air of exclusivity. It was during this period that Kate made a discovery that changed everything. At the Dowager's request, who insisted that Kate know the Montague family lineage, she was in the library researching the history of the Ashfords. Upon pulling a heavy volume about the Dukes of Ashford, a packet of yellowed letters that had been hidden between the pages fell into her lap. The letters were addressed to Sebastian's father, the fourth Duke, and dated from 20 years prior. The sender's name made Kate's blood run cold. Margaret Hartwell, her mother. The contents revealed a truth so shocking that Kate had to sit down to absorb it. Her mother had not always been the bitter woman who had sold her daughter. She had once been a governess in the Ashford household, teaching Sebastian's younger sister. She had been dismissed suddenly, given a generous settlement, and warned never to contact the family again. The reason was clear from the letters. She had been with child, the fourth Duke's child. Kate's father, the quiet clerk who had raised her, had not been her father at all. The implications were staggering. She was Sebastian's half-sister. The attraction between them, which she had tried so hard to suppress, was not just inappropriate, but unthinkable. The irony was bitter. She actually did have Ashford blood, actually was connected to the family, but in a way that made any romantic attachment impossible and the current charade even more dangerous. Kate's first instinct was to flee immediately, to disappear before this truth could emerge and destroy everyone involved. But practical considerations intervened. She had no money of her own, nowhere to go, and her disappearance would only prompt investigations that might uncover the very truth she sought to hide. She needed time to plan, to find a way to extricate herself without destroying Sebastian and the Dowager in the process. Her behavior over the following days was erratic enough to draw notice. She became withdrawn, avoided Sebastian's company whenever possible, and threw herself into social activities with a desperation that concerned the Dowager. When questioned, she claimed fatigue, the strain of maintaining her new position, but her explanations rang hollow. It was Lady Sarah Winters who inadvertently provided the solution. During a morning call, she mentioned her cousin in Bath who was seeking a companion, someone genteel but willing to travel to Italy where the cousin intended to live for her health. The position would provide independence, distance, and most importantly, a legitimate reason to end the false engagement without scandal. Kate began laying the groundwork carefully. She expressed interest in travel, spoke longingly of Italy's art and culture, mentioned how she had always dreamed of seeing Rome. The Dowager, thinking this another accomplishment to add to Kate's growing sophistication, encouraged these interests, never suspecting they were part of an escape plan. Meanwhile, Sebastian had become increasingly frustrated by Kate's sudden coolness. Where once she had responded to his presence with that subtle awareness that had grown between them, now she seemed almost afraid of him. He found himself seeking her out more often, only to have her find excuses to avoid being alone with him. His frustration was compounded by his growing realization that what had begun as a convenient fiction had become something far more serious, at least for him. The crisis came at the Ashbury Ball, one of the season's major events. Kate, resplendent in an emerald gown that matched her eyes, was dancing with Lord Timmins when Lady Constance Pemberton, her spite fueled by champagne and jealousy, loudly announced that she had made inquiries about Miss Hartwell's background. The results, she declared with vicious satisfaction, were most interesting. The ballroom fell silent as Lady Constance revealed what her hired investigators had discovered: Kate's residence in Whitechapel, her mother's debts, the suspicious timing of her engagement to Sebastian just as she faced ruin. She stopped short of mentioning Mrs. Wickham's establishment, either from ignorance or a last vestige of propriety, but the damage was considerable. Sebastian's response was swift and decisive. He crossed the ballroom to Kate's side, took her hand in full view of everyone, and announced that he was well aware of Miss Hartwell's previous circumstances. Her courage in overcoming adversity, her strength of character, her intelligence and grace, despite lacking advantages others took for granted. These were precisely the qualities that had drawn him to her. Anyone who could not appreciate such qualities was welcome to absent themselves from their future gatherings. The defense was magnificent, delivered with such cold authority that even Lady Constance quailed. But Kate, standing beside him, feeling the protective strength of his presence, knew that this scandal was nothing compared to what would emerge if the truth of her parentage became known. She had to leave, had to end this before Sebastian's gallant defense became his destruction. That night, Kate made her decision. She would accept Lady Sarah's offer to introduce her to the cousin in Bath. She would end the engagement, citing an inability to overcome the vast differences in their stations despite Sebastian's kindness. It would hurt him perhaps, wound his pride certainly, but it would save him from the far greater catastrophe of discovering he had been romantically attached to his half-sister. She wrote the letter that night, choosing her words carefully. She expressed her gratitude for his protection, her admiration for his character, her deep appreciation for the Dowager's efforts to transform her. But she could not, she wrote, continue with a deception that grew more elaborate daily. She was not meant for his world, could never truly belong, despite all efforts to the contrary. She begged him to let her go quietly, to allow her to establish herself independently without scandal or recrimination. The letter was never sent. As dawn broke over Grosvenor Square, Kate sat at her escritoire, the sealed letter in her hand, when Prudence knocked urgently. The Dowager required her presence immediately in the library. Something in the maid's expression suggested this was not a normal summons. Kate found the library occupied not just by the Dowager, but by Sebastian, Lord Worthington, and surprisingly, her mother. Mrs. Hartwell, looking haggard and frightened, stood near the fireplace under the watchful eye of Thompson, Sebastian's coachman. The atmosphere in the room was electric with tension. The story that emerged was both better and worse than Kate had feared. Mrs. Hartwell, emboldened by gin and desperate for more money, had attempted to blackmail the Dowager, threatening to reveal Kate's true parentage. No, she admitted with cruel relish. Kate was not the fourth Duke's daughter. The letters Kate had discovered, those damning documents that had tormented her for days, were forgeries, an insurance policy her mother had planted years ago should she ever need a more sophisticated weapon. The truth, Mrs. Hartwell claimed with vicious satisfaction, was potentially far more damaging. She possessed proof that Kate's real father was not the quiet clerk who had raised her with such gentle dignity, but rather a notorious radical who had been hanged for treason. This revelation hit Kate like a physical blow. The letters she had found were forgeries, a weapon her mother had created if needed. The truth was different, but equally destructive. She was the daughter of a traitor, someone whose name was reviled throughout England. No amount of transformation could overcome such a taint. But Sebastian's response was unexpected. He laughed, actually laughed, at Mrs. Hartwell's threats. Did she truly think, he asked, that he cared about Kate's parentage? Did she imagine that the opinion of society mattered more to him than Kate herself? He had not saved her from Mrs. Wickham's establishment to abandon her now over something as irrelevant as her father's identity. The dowager's reaction was equally surprising. She fixed Mrs. Hartwell with a stare that could have frozen hell itself and informed her that attempted blackmail of a peer was a serious crime. She had two choices: accept a generous sum to relocate permanently to Australia, never to contact Kate again, or face prosecution that would certainly result in transportation under far less comfortable circumstances. Mrs. Hartwell, faced with this ultimatum, crumbled. She took the money and fled, but not before casting one last look at Kate, a mixture of resentment, regret, and something that might have been shame. Kate would never see her again, would never have the chance to understand what had transformed a governess into someone capable of selling her own daughter. When the others had departed, leaving Kate alone with Sebastian, the emotional dam finally broke. She wept as she had not wept since her father's death, great gasping sobs that shook her entire frame. Sebastian held her through it all, his arms providing an anchor in the storm of her emotions, his quiet strength more comforting than any words could have been. When the storm finally passed, Kate found herself still in Sebastian's arms, her face buried against his chest, his hand gently stroking her hair. It was completely improper, scandalously intimate, and absolutely perfect. For the first time since finding those forged letters, she allowed herself to feel the truth of what existed between them. Not the convenient fiction they had created, but something real and powerful and terrifying in its intensity. Sebastian's confession, when it came, was quiet but decisive. He loved her. He had loved her from the moment she had stood on that doorstep in Whitechapel, facing her fate with quiet dignity. He had loved her through every lesson, every transformation, every challenge she had overcome. The engagement might have begun as a fiction, but his feelings were absolutely real. Kate's response was to try to pull away, to remind him of all the reasons why this was impossible. She was nobody, worse than nobody, if her mother's claims about her father were true. She would drag him down, destroy his reputation, make him a laughingstock among his peers. She could not, would not allow him to sacrifice everything for someone so far beneath him. Sebastian's answer silenced all her protests. He did not care about her parentage, her origins, her lack of connections. He cared about her intelligence, her courage, her kindness, her strength. He loved the way she had faced every challenge, the way she treated everyone from the dowager to the lowest servant with equal respect, the way she had transformed not just her appearance, but had allowed her true self to shine through. As for society, he continued, they could accept his choice or not as they pleased. He had wealth enough to ensure their comfort, regardless of social ostracism, influence enough to protect her from the worst of society's cruelty, and determination enough to face down anyone who dared slight the woman he loved. The only question that mattered was whether she could love him in return. Kate's answer was wordless, but unmistakable. She kissed him with all the pent-up emotion of the past months, all the longing she had tried to suppress, all the love she had been afraid to acknowledge. It was her first kiss, inexpert but enthusiastic, and when they finally parted, both were breathless and forever changed. The dowager, who had been shamelessly eavesdropping from the hallway, chose that moment to enter. Her expression was stern, but there was something suspiciously like moisture in her eyes as she surveyed the couple before her. Her verdict was characteristically direct. They were fools, both of them, to think this could end well. Society would never fully accept Kate. There would always be whispers, always be those who remembered her origins. But if they were determined to be fools, she supposed she had no choice but to support them. The wedding, when it came 6 weeks later, was neither the grand society event that would typically mark a ducal union, nor the hole-and-corner affair Kate had feared. It was held at the Ashford estate in Derbyshire, with a guest list limited to those who had proven themselves true friends. Lady Sarah Winters served as Kate's attendant, Lord Worthington as Sebastian's groomsman, and the Dowager presided over it all with the fierce protectiveness of a dragon guarding its hoard. The ceremony itself was simple but moving. Kate wore her mother's wedding dress, retrieved from storage and expertly altered by Madame Rochelle. Sebastian's gift of the Ashford diamonds, a necklace, tiara, and bracelets that had been worn by duchesses for 3 centuries, transformed the simple gown into something magnificent. But it was the expression on Sebastian's face as she walked toward him, the love and pride and joy that blazed from those storm-gray eyes that made her truly beautiful. The wedding breakfast that followed was a mixture of elegance and warmth that perfectly captured the nature of their union. The Dowager had spared no expense on the feast, but the atmosphere was intimate rather than ostentatious. Speeches were made, toasts offered, and if some of society's highest sticklers were notably absent, no one seemed to mind. Lord Worthington's speech was particularly memorable. He told the story of that morning in Whitechapel, of Sebastian's immediate determination to save a woman he had never met, of Kate's dignity in the face of catastrophe. He spoke of transformation, not just Kate's external transformation, but the way she had transformed everyone around her, making the Dowager show a softer side many had thought extinct, making Sebastian smile more in 3 months than in the previous 3 years, making all of them believe that true worth had nothing to do with birth and everything to do with character. The Dowager's speech was shorter, but no less impactful. She admitted she had been wrong, not about the difficulties they would face, which were real and would continue, but about Kate's ability to overcome them. She had trained many young women for society, but Kate was the only one who had understood that true nobility came from within. She welcomed her as not just a granddaughter-in-law, but as the daughter she had never had. Sebastian's speech was the most moving of all. He spoke not of Kate's transformation, but of his own. She had taught him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it, that true strength came from vulnerability, that love was not a weakness, but the greatest power of all. He promised to spend the rest of his life proving worthy of the trust she had placed in him when she had agreed to that first, impossible charade. Kate's response broke with tradition. Duchesses did not typically speak at their own wedding breakfasts. But then, she was not a typical duchess. She thanked the Dowager for seeing potential where others would have seen only impossibility. She thanked Lord Worthington for his kindness and friendship. She thanked the assembled guests for their acceptance and support. But most of all, she thanked Sebastian for seeing her, not as she was, but as she could be, for giving her not just protection, but purpose, for offering not just his name, but his heart. And here, dearest listeners, the chronicle of their romance might well have ended, tied with the neat bow of matrimonial bliss. But their union was not an ending, but a beginning. And the true measure of their triumph was not captured in that single perfect day, but in the remarkable legacy they would build across the decades that followed. For what good is a love story, after all, if it ends at the altar? The real test of any great romance is not the wedding, but the life that comes after. And in this, Sebastian and Kate would prove themselves worthy of the fairy tale they had begun. The honeymoon was spent at a small estate Sebastian owned in the Lake District, far from the prying eyes of society. For 2 weeks, they existed in a private paradise, learning each other without the constraints of propriety or the pressure of public performance. Kate discovered that beneath Sebastian's controlled exterior lay a man of deep passion and surprising playfulness. Sebastian discovered that Kate's quiet strength concealed a wicked sense of humor and an adventurous spirit that delighted him. They walked the fells, sailed on Windermere, read poetry to each other in the evenings. They talked of everything and nothing, their hopes for the future, their fears from the past, their dreams for the family they hoped to create. They made love with a passion that would have shocked society, but seemed perfectly natural to two people who had fought so hard for their happiness. The return to London was necessarily daunting. News of the marriage had spread, reactions ranging from shock to outrage to reluctant admiration. Some doors were permanently closed to them. Lady Constance Pemberton had married a wealthy merchant in a fit of pique, and her mother made it clear the Ashfords were no longer welcome in their circle. But other doors opened. Reformers and intellectuals who cared more for character than bloodlines. Younger members of society who found the romance of the story irresistible. Kate's first appearance as the Duchess of Ashford was at a charity concert benefiting orphans of the war. It was a calculated choice. Who could object to charitable work? But also a genuine one. Kate had not forgotten where she came from, had not forgotten how close she had come to a very different fate. She threw herself into the cause with genuine passion, using her position to raise awareness and funds for those who, like herself, had faced circumstances beyond their control. The success of this first event led to others. Kate became known for her charitable work, her genuine concern for the less fortunate, her ability to bridge the gap between the highest and lowest levels of society. She never forgot a name or a face, never looked down on anyone regardless of their station, never allowed her elevation to make her forget her origins. Sebastian watched his wife's growing confidence with pride and love. She had become everything the dowager had trained her to be, and more. A duchess who commanded respect not through birthright but through character, who led not through authority but through example. The tongue might whisper about her origins, but they could not deny her impact. The true test came when Kate discovered she was with child. The future of the dukedom now rested within her, and suddenly those who had been willing to tolerate her as Sebastian's eccentric choice had to accept her as the mother of the future duke. The pregnancy was difficult. Kate was sick for months, confined to bed for weeks, and there were moments when both she and the child were in real danger. But she survived, as she had survived everything else life had thrown at her. The birth of James Sebastian Montague, Marquess of Harrington, was celebrated throughout the estate with genuine joy. The baby, healthy and strong, had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair, a perfect combination of both parents. The christening was attended by everyone who mattered and many who simply wanted to matter. Even some who had initially shunned Kate could not resist the opportunity to attend such a significant event. The Prince Regent himself stood as godfather, a coup orchestrated by the dowager that silenced many critics. If the prince accepted the Duchess of Ashford, who were they to object? Life settled into a pattern of contentment that Kate had never dared imagine. She divided her time between London and Derbyshire, raised her children, for James was followed by 3 siblings in quick succession, managed her charities, and loved her husband with an intensity that never diminished. The whispers about her origins never entirely ceased, but they became increasingly irrelevant as her position solidified and her contributions to society became undeniable. The dowager lived to see her first great-grandchild born, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. Her last words to Kate were typically direct. "You exceeded every expectation, child. You became not just a duchess, but the duchess I always knew this family needed." Sebastian chose better than he knew. Years later, when Kate's own hair had turned silver and her children were making their own way in the world, she would sometimes think back to that morning in Whitechapel when salvation had arrived in the unlikely form of a duke's carriage. The path from there to here had been neither straight nor easy, but it had led her to a happiness she had never dreamed possible. The scandal of her origins had become, over time, merely part of the legend. The young woman of humble origins who became a duchess. The woman who proved that worth was not determined by birth, but by character. Young women facing their own difficult circumstances would seek her out, finding in her not just charity, but understanding, not just help, but hope. Sebastian, for his part, never regretted his impulsive decision to save a stranger from ruin. In Kate, he had found not just a wife but a partner, not just a duchess, but a woman who challenged him, supported him, loved him with a fierce devotion that matched his own. Their love story became the stuff of legend, whispered about in drawing rooms, immortalized in poorly written novels that never quite captured the truth of it. But the truth, as Kate knew, was both simpler and more complex than any story could convey. It was the truth of two people who had found each other against impossible odds, who had fought society's expectations and won, who had built a love strong enough to withstand any storm. It was the truth of transformation, not just Kate's transformation from a clerk's daughter to duchess, but the transformation of everyone touched by their story. Lord Worthington, inspired by Kate's example, had married a merchant's daughter of great intelligence and little pedigree, creating another scandal that somehow seemed less shocking in the wake of Sebastian and Kate's success. Lady Sarah Winters had become Kate's closest friend and most trusted advisor, helping her navigate the treacherous waters of society with wisdom and humor. Even Lady Constance, years later and unhappily married to her merchant, would admit privately that Kate had made a better duchess than she ever could have been. The ultimate vindication came when James, the heir Kate had given Sebastian, fell in love with a perfectly appropriate earl's daughter, who confessed she had agreed to marry him partly because she so admired his mother. The girl, Lady Elizabeth Harrington, saw in Kate not a cautionary tale of social climbing, but an inspiration, proof that true nobility came from within, that character mattered more than bloodlines, that love could conquer even the most rigid social barriers. Kate's other children followed similar paths, choosing spouses based on genuine affection rather than purely dynastic considerations. Her eldest daughter, Margaret, married a brilliant physician whose grandfather had been a blacksmith. Her second son, William, chose a vicar's daughter whose gentle nature and sharp intelligence reminded everyone of Kate herself. Her youngest, Sophia, scandalized and delighted society in equal measure by marrying an Italian count she met during one of the family's journeys to Rome, fulfilling, in a way, Kate's long-ago dream of seeing Italy, though under circumstances far different than she had once imagined. The Ashford legacy, enriched by Kate's influence, became one not just of wealth and title, but of progressive thought and genuine philanthropy. The orphanages and schools Kate established outlived her by generations, providing opportunities for countless children who, like her, had been born to circumstances that might have crushed their potential. The Ashford Foundation, established with Sebastian's enthusiastic support, became a model for aristocratic charity, proving that noblesse oblige could be more than empty words. In her later years, Kate would often sit in the rose garden at Ashford Park, the same garden where she had once spotted one of Mrs. Wickham's men watching the house during her transformation. The roses, carefully tended over decades, had grown into a magnificent display that drew visitors from across the county. It seemed to Kate a fitting metaphor, beauty that had required patience, care, and the courage to put down roots in soil that had initially seemed foreign. Sebastian would join her there in the evenings, his hair now silver, but his eyes still that remarkable storm gray that had first captured her attention. They would sit in comfortable silence, occasionally sharing observations about their children, grandchildren, and the changing world around them. The Reform Act had passed, the world was modernizing, and many of the rigid social structures that had once seemed immutable were beginning to soften. One particular evening, as the sun set over the Derbyshire hills, Sebastian took Kate's hand, still elegant despite the years, still capable of making his heart race with a simple touch. He brought it to his lips, just as he had that night after the musicale, and murmured words that brought tears to her eyes. "Every day with you has been worth a lifetime of conventional happiness. You saved me far more than I saved you, my darling Kate." Kate's response was to lean into him, this man who had been her salvation, her challenge, her greatest love. She thought of her mother, long dead in Australia, who had sold her for 30 pieces of silver. She thought of Mrs. Wickham, whose establishment had been finally closed through Sebastian's persistent legal efforts. She thought of all the moments when their unlikely union might have failed, all the forces that had tried to tear them apart. Yet here they sat, surrounded by the legacy of their love, not just in their children and grandchildren, but in the countless lives they had touched, the barriers they had broken, the proof they had provided that love, genuine love, could overcome any obstacle society erected. The dowager had been wrong about one thing: society's memory, while long, was not inflexible. Over the years, the story of the Duke and Duchess of Ashford had transformed from scandal to romance, from cautionary tale to inspiration. Young women trapped by circumstance drew hope from Kate's example. Young men of privilege began to question whether bloodlines truly mattered more than character. Kate's final public appearance was at the wedding of her first grandchild, James's eldest son, another Sebastian who had inherited both his grandfather's dark good looks and his grandmother's remarkable green eyes. The young man was marrying for love, choosing a girl whose birth was respectable but not illustrious, whose dowry was modest but whose spirit was magnificent. At the wedding breakfast, the elderly Duchess of Ashford was asked to speak. Her voice, though softened by age, still carried the clarity and dignity that had served her so well through the years. She spoke of love's power to transform, of the courage required to defy convention, of the rewards that came to those brave enough to follow their hearts rather than society's dictates. She concluded with words that would be remembered and quoted for generations. "I stand before you as proof that Providence sometimes delivers its gifts in the most unexpected packages." A girl from Whitechapel became a duchess not through subterfuge or manipulation, but through the grace of a good man's love and the determination to become worthy of it. True nobility, I have learned, has nothing to do with the circumstances of one's birth and everything to do with the choices one makes. Choose love, choose courage, choose kindness. These are the only bloodlines that truly matter. The applause that followed was thunderous, and there were few dry eyes in the assembly. Sebastian, still her devoted husband after all these years, helped her back to her seat with the same protective care he had shown that first day in Whitechapel. Their eyes met, and in that glance was the entire story of their love. The desperate beginning, the uncertain middle, the triumphant conclusion. Kate lived for 3 more years after that wedding, each day a gift she had never expected to receive. She died peacefully in her sleep on a spring morning, with Sebastian holding her hand and their children gathered around her bed. Her last words, whispered to Sebastian alone, were, "Thank you for seeing me, truly seeing me, when I could not even see myself." Sebastian followed her 6 months later, unable or unwilling to live in a world without his Kate. They were buried side by side in the Ashford family crypt, but their true monument was not in marble and stone, but in the lives they had changed, the love they had shared, and the proof they had provided that fairy tales, sometimes, could indeed come true. The title passed to James, who proved a worthy successor, carrying forward his parents' legacy of progressive thought and genuine nobility. He would often tell his own children the story of their grandparents, how a duke had saved a girl from a brothel, how that girl had saved him right back, how together they had created something beautiful and lasting from the most unlikely beginning. And so the tale ends as all the best tales do, not with perfection, for life is never perfect, but with love triumphant over adversity, with courage rewarded, with the promise that sometimes, just sometimes, Providence arranges matters exactly as they should be. The girl who had been sold for £30 had become priceless. The Duke who had thought himself above love had discovered it in the most unexpected place. Together, they had proven that love's price, whatever it might be, was always worth paying. And so another tale of hearts united reaches its blessed conclusion. Love, it seems, finds a way even through the strictest conventions of proper society.